1045 The Team and 1045theteam.com. The Paddock Pass is happy to have TVG's Todd Schrupp joining us to a huge weekend coming up at Belmont Park. The Stars and Stripes is this weekend. A lot of big races headlining that card on Saturday. But Todd, we're going to start with Santa Anita. They just recently ended their spring/summer meet. So let's take a look at one of the issues the entire meet wasn't handle, it wasn't the attendance, but they had to cancel a couple of days of racing because of lack of field size. What can Santa Anita do here to kind of fix that?
You know, to be honest with you, it's a systemic problem to the entire circuit in California. Times are different in California racing than they were a decade ago, much different than they were 10 years prior to that. You can see the effect of a small full crop. It really starts with a broader industry issue, and that is the full crop and the degradation of it over the course of the last 20 years. At the bloodstock market's peak, when thoroughbred racehorses were valued in the sales ring at all-time highs, say in the mid-'80s, you had a full crop that was coming in around 42,000 foals born each year consistently. So look, at that time, we didn't have as much racing, but we definitely had a lot more horses. So essentially, you're talking about there's more inventory, and across the country, there'd be bigger fields everywhere. As that full crop has shrunk, as racing has expanded to more racing days, it's affected certain parts of the country more than others. You have a full crop now that hovers around 25,000 consistently each year. And so there's just not enough horses to go around. So that effect, when you have a full crop that is down, say, this year, you're going to feel that effect 2 years from now. So this has been something that slowly has been building. And California is affected like all other racing jurisdictions because of that, but also location. Think about it this way. What track could ship in east of Santa Anita? Whereas you're sitting in New York, and there's all kinds of feeder tracks because of how close all the states are and the borders are. There's always horses that can come in from other tracks. How far east would you have to go from Santa Anita to have a horse ship in? So essentially, there isn't a track that could realistically ship in conveniently, or horsemen or women to ship in horses east of Santa Anita going for essentially thousands of miles. So you have to depend upon what's in Northern California, what's in the Pacific Northwest up above that. And Washington already is feeling their own problems with their racing product. And then you'd have to look south to Arizona. So essentially, California is out on an island. You've got a horse population of about 2,800 or so that you're having to deal with. And it's always going to be an issue. It's not necessarily going to get better. And so the circuit has to decide how many racing days we're going to have. Just the fact that you said Santa Anita just got done. I mean, think about that for a moment. They opened up the day after Christmas, and they raced until July 4th. And that's all because Hollywood Park went away going on 4 years ago now. So there's an adjustment period going on in the circuit. So I guess, and I know it's a long answer to an opening question, but it's an industry problem because of the full crop, and it's also a geographical issue here in California just because we're on an island out on our own.
That's true, Todd. That's very true. Now, let's look at, you mentioned New York this weekend. The big racing is going to be at Belmont Park, the Stars and Stripes Racing Festival that Naira's putting on. Tons of big races to get to, but I want to start with the Dwyer, just for the local connection with Chad Brown. He's taking on Practical Joke, who ran the Kentucky Derby. He's coming back in this race, and it seems to be a match race between him and Todd Pletcher's Battalion Runner. Who has the edge in this race?
Well, it would be naturally the easy answer to say it would be Battalion Runner because of his effort in the Wood Memorial. He was the favorite in the Wood Memorial, and he gets beat by Irish War Cry, who did everything but possibly win the Belmont. And then Cloud Computing was in that race, in which Battalion Runner was 3.5 clear. So, yeah, Battalion Runner beating the Chad Brown train, Cloud Computing, who goes on to win the Preakness, and a good second to Irish War Cry. But the key to the Dwyer is pretty obvious. It's a one-turn mile, and that's where I think Practical Joke was always his best. I just never understood why everyone thought he was going to have some breakthrough moment on the Triple Crown Trail. I personally think he exceeded all expectations as far as I saw him. I don't think he's a true two-turn horse, and so for him to finish second in the Fountain of Youth as he did, second in the Bluegrass, and then even the Kentucky Derby, beating 15 horses home out of a field of 20, I thought was impressive. It is an absolute showdown between these two horses because Practical Joke is back where he should be around one turn. Battalion Runner has already proven his mettle with what he did in the Grade 2 Wood Memorial. What clearly separates them is running style, and it's going to come down to the pace of this race because there's no doubt Battalion Runner is going to the lead. Practical Joke is coming from off the pace. What I don't see in here is someone who could realistically challenge Battalion Runner on the lead in here. The great equalizer is that Chad Brown is so great when he gives a horse some time off and they can retool. He's kind of, the fact that he came up under Bobby Frankel, that has been the difference as far as his abilities in a lot of categories. He's just learned from the best. So, look, from a pace point of view, easy to say Battalion Runner gets out there and takes them gate to wire. But I think Practical Joke around the one turn and back to where he should be. I think he'll get the measure of Battalion Runner, but it's clearly a two-horse race in the Dwyer.
One of the big returns that we're waiting for this weekend, Todd, is in the Belmont Sprint Championships that sees the return of Mind Your Biscuits. Unified, his biggest competitor, obviously in the morning lines and through the PPs. Is the morning line correct? Is it clearly just these two, or can I go deeper than just these two in this race?
Well, Awesome Slew's an interesting horse to me. I was there for his Commonwealth when he won the Keeneland. He's kind of the logical second choice at 5-1. Stall-walking dude always has kind of a race that he's capable of. He's 7. He's won 18 times. But, yeah, this race does mirror the Dwyer. I think it's these two horses. Mind Your Biscuits was awesome in Dubai. He was even pretty good in defeat in the Gulfstream Park Sprint when he lost to Unified. These two have met each other before, and it's very, very similar to the Dwyer with the two horses that we just talked about, Battalion Runner and Practical Joke, from a running style point of view. Unified is absolutely going to be out on the lead. Mind Your Biscuits is a horse that's going to come from off the pace. And so, realistically, these are the two horses far and away.
Talking to Todd Schrupp from TVG. You can follow him on Twitter at ToddTVG. Now, Todd, I know we follow a lot of Chad Brown up here with his horses just beginning to train up at Saratoga, but he sends out 4 in the Belmont Oaks weekend. Is there any way that I go against the family and just take Chad Brown's 4 horses, or can anyone else win this race?
Well, look, you got to give credit to Aidan O'Brien for showing up. You got to give credit to the New York Racing Office. This really goes back to Martin Panza, who heads up their racing department now. He used to be in California. He was a longtime racing secretary at Hollywood Park. And talk about making something out of nothing. He didn't have a lot to work with here in his latter years, and he was one of the most creative racing secretaries I've ever seen. But the key to Martin Panza is his ability to get horsemen from overseas to come over for big races. He created the American Oaks at Hollywood Park, and in that first year, we had, Dermot Weld was a European trainer who would come over to California all the time. And so when you look at what he's done in New York, talking about Martin Panza, director of racing, is he has brought that with him, those relationships. So the fact that Aidan O'Brien shows up in this race with a horse like Key to My Heart speaks to the depth of the field. But Chad Brown also has a horse who's coming to the United States for the first time in Uni, who has great upside and great potential, but he also has Sister Charlie as well. It's interesting. Chad Brown is basically out Aidan O'Brien. And so where Aidan O'Brien comes at a lot of the races overseas with large numbers, it's Aidan O'Brien coming into Chad Brown's backyard, and he's kind of doing what Aidan O'Brien would do overseas. So, it's not only the strength of the couple of horses that he has locally, it's the fact that even the horses that have shipped in from overseas are in Chad Brown's barn. And I think ultimately Sister Charlie, there's no doubt Sister Charlie has a tremendous class edge over this field based on her last effort at Shanti. So, yeah, you'd be wise to stick in the family. It's nice to see that Aidan O'Brien came over, but I think Aidan O'Brien brought a horse over that ultimately is not clearly one of his best in this division. So this is Chad Brown's race to absolutely win.
Todd, you mentioned the trainers coming over from Europe, and we have this in a plethora of different horses in the Belmont Derby. This race is wide open, and I know this is a key portion of the Pick 4. How deep do I have to go, and where am I looking in this race? Because it seems like the European invasion is happening again in this turf race.
Yeah, this is where Aidan O'Brien's best chance is. So when a trainer, and be it from California or whatever circuit, ships a long way, they'll usually bring another horse with that horse. Homesman is the main horse that Aidan O'Brien came to this festival with, and he's the logical horse. Yoshida is a horse that I got to see at Keeneland, and he was awesome in his April 9th win. He had not raced since November, but immediately when I watched that performance, I thought, here's a rising star. They really gave him the perfect opportunity in the J.W. Murphy last time out of Pimlico, a minor stakes race, and I still don't know how he overcame his start. I mean, if you're a trip handicapper, you don't have to be a trip handicapper. Just look at Yoshida's last two races in the past performances. Gate to wire at Keeneland, which is tough to do on the turf course there, and then last time out, rallies from last after getting pinched back at the break from more than 20 lengths back and wins by 4. Yoshida is awesome and is bred to run all day by Heart's Cry, who is a champion in Japan, and this horse was bred in Japan out of Hilda's Passion. Windstar Farm and Belmont have a serious runner in Yoshida. Now, I hate to say that, especially pointing to two horses that are going to take some play and what could be perceived as a wide-open race. I would think from a pick 4 point of view, this is a race where you go maybe 3 to 4 deep. I wouldn't overthink it too much, just because, like I said, I think Yoshida is an absolute star in the making here in the United States. I think called to the bar while not having the most well-known connections of horses shipping in makes a ton of sense. The 3 horses that I would be using and feeling confident that I could get out of the Belmont Derby with is the 3 Homesmen, the 5 Called to the Bar, and the 7 Yoshida. I mean, you think of it this way: if you were a trainer and you were running a coupled entry of those 3 horses, you'd be pretty confident you're going to win that race. From a bettor's point of view, having those 3 horses, that's what I would focus my pick 4 around. Take those 3 and then build out from there in the other races.
Todd, you'll be hearing from me on Twitter if we get through that leg, man, because that means I have a pretty good chance of hitting this pick 4 on Saturday. But Todd, I know one thing from hanging out with you guys down at Belmont, even seeing some of you at Saratoga, that you guys are a close-knit family at TVG, and you had some news pass through the airwaves this week that one of your good friends and coworkers that you've had for quite some time now is leaving TVG, and that's Paul LaDuca. Was this news surprising to you over this past weekend, or how did this come about?
Here's the thing. Paul is so talented, and for you to mention that he's my friend I'm glad you said that, because that's what's on his resume as far as I'm concerned. That's the hardest connection. When Paul came to TVG, it was always like, well, maybe he'll be here for a couple of years. There's other opportunities he could take on, but nothing ever, and from his perspective, was something that he really, really wanted to do. And the next thing you know, 8 years go by. And so it wasn't until Paul mentioned to me that he wanted to be back on the East Coast, and there were some opportunities for him out there, several opportunities, and I think he's going to have an announcement about one of the main ones coming up this week, as a matter of fact. But it wasn't until then that I started to realize I've been with him for 8 years, and I've been at TVG for 18, so he's been I've been there since the beginning, and he's been there for a good portion of that. You can't help but be really close to someone over the course of that, and it was really hard. And I've had a lot of people come and go over the years when you're at a place for such a long time, but it is something that always stays with you, and there's going to be a huge void without Paul there. I'm going to miss him as a colleague. He brought so much to our show, but the hardest part is what you brought up. He's a friend. I mean, the great thing about it is he's always going to be my friend, but now he's going to be on the East Coast. He's going to be a long ways away, and it's going to be hard not seeing him at work. He made our programming better, and he also made me a better person. When anyone comes into your life and they become a friend, you can't help but take something away from them, and I know he felt the same way. We had more of an emotional it was emotional on air, as you saw, and then we had an even more emotional conversation off the air, and I look forward. I'm going to be coming to Saratoga a couple times this year for the Jim Dandy and the Travers, so I look forward to reconnecting with Paul. I look forward to seeing you, too.
Absolutely, Todd. We'll definitely grab some time, maybe grab some dinner. And you could just tell, even seeing you guys when I went to Belmont and other times on the air, that there was a real connection there. Do you have any clue of where he could be going, or?
I'd look for him a lot more in your area.
Nice. We'll leave it at that.
I'll leave that tantalizing clue. But I'm so glad you brought up the personal connection. Imagine, Brian, because you have the friends that you hang out with at the racetrack. So imagine if at your local track, guy who had been part of your group for so long, all of a sudden says, "I'm moving, 5,400 miles away." It's hard, and so that's the thing about. It's not just an employee leaving TVG. That happens at every company. Employees come and go. It's kind of your racetrack crew. They're now leaving, so now it's a different feeling when you go to work. Now today, or when I go to Los Alamitos this week, it'll be Simon, it'll be familiar faces, but it's going to be an adjustment period for me to not look to look to my left and not see Paul there. And so I would just say, if anyone wants to relate to it, just imagine someone in your racetrack crew all of a sudden not part of that crew anymore on a daily basis. It definitely is a void.
Yeah, Todd, all of us who go to the racetrack often know that feeling, and it hits pretty well home to know that that's the connection that was there. But we appreciate you giving us the time, man, and hopefully, like you said, we see you up at Saratoga. We know that the listeners will be joining on Jim Dandy Day and Travers Day, and hopefully we can stop by and say hi.
Brian, I get to do a number of radio interviews throughout the year, but you are far and away the best program out there for horse players, and I hope they appreciate what you're doing for them. And I thank you very much for including me on your show. So I can't wait to see you this summer.